Well met, lords and ladies, Jacob Butter speaking, and a warm welcome to this week's Walking Wednesday. And, again, like I said yesterday, if I am blinking weirdly or closing my eye or something, I've once again is even more irritated than it was last night, actually. Because that just sometimes randomly happens over the past couple of days. Not really sure. Also, I'm roughly going around the same area as I was last week, I'm pretty sure, but I realise that's because there are some signs that have said diverted traffic. So, and they were pointing both this direction and that direction, and then I went, further away or something, because I don't know why traffic would be diverted. Oh, I guess, multi-directional. Kind of interesting that now these two cars have gone past here, so I'm not sure how diverted the traffic has to be. So, I don't know. It just kind of seems like, once again, a confusing indicator to arrive at the same destination, which is actually fairly appropriate and a fitting segue into what I want to discuss this week. Because, yes, it's going to be another themed episode. Because, once again, a pattern has emerged, at least when it comes to the reviews and such. I could talk once again about more mini-muse stuff, but if you've seen that stream, you kind of know where things currently stand, I suppose. And I guess to really properly discuss, what I've seen as a pattern, I'm going to go a little bit back in time and discuss something that pertains to me, and use myself as an example. So when I first started writing books, all the way back to the very first one, Erasmus the Elf, I quickly realized that I had a particular methodology when it came to structuring a story for a book. This is not unique necessarily, but it's just something that I kind of stumbled across and has sort of maintained when it comes to the majority of, at least literary works, that I am currently involved with. Ironically enough, not the next book I plan to publish. That one took a bit longer to figure out, but most of them, that was the case. And that is that I had a beginning and I had an ending in mind, and not necessarily the middle portions as of yet. And for years I've been offering that very same advice, because, I think, well, if you've got the beginning and the end, you know where your story is heading, so you know what kind of direction you want to point your story, and you know what details you want to actually flesh out, maybe what characters you want to be involved. And even if you don't, that can be, added to the end, or things could be removed and such. Obviously be flexible with it. Don't think there's very strict, you must adhere to this and you can't change your mind kind of deal, because that's absolutely not the case. And but this week I've definitely been thinking about the downside to that method. I think the reason that it works for books so well is because there's no perceived time limit, right? The only limit is your imagination, and I suppose, in a dire circumstance, paper, see Tolkien having to split Lord of the Rings into 3 parts, for example. Printing demands might be a slight limitation, but, generally speaking, there are no limits to a book, especially lengthwise. So with that in mind, you can sort of take as much time as you really need to put all of the pieces together, or to tease all of the puzzle pieces for the final big picture that is the roughly planned out ending. So that's why I continued to use that method, particularly for books and such. And for some shows, Mutant Girl Season 2 was definitely one such example where, the ending and the reveals and the methodologies behind everything were pretty much set in stone from the initial planning phase for it all the way back in 2019 when Shiny first pitched it to me, because I realized that pitch idea that he had that was only meant to be a few episodes worth of time would serve as a good second season for the show. So to that effect, obviously there were a lot of things happened in the middle there, but I was able to, because I had like the full mystery reveal planned out, I could, structure the season around, like I said before, the idea of someone rewatching and getting more clues as, time progressed, basically. And that still remains one of my favorite like writing exercises when regarding like anything that I've done, and it came from that same idea. But once again, that was a full season's worth of content. That there was certainly time, and while I wasn't originally planning to go beyond the standard 10 episodes that most gacha series at the time kept their series to, I eventually branched it out into 12 episodes instead. Just simply how it turned out. And so I was prepared to go longer for the sake of the story. So, thinking about it that way, a full season of something still works in screen format, or at least, in my experience of it. But what happens when you're dealing with individual episodes? Then you kind of get a lot of examples like what we've seen this week on Gacha Review and on Minecraft Review, actually. Because I guess even going back even to the start of the week with the rarest alphas, which I don't remember that much about that video specifically, although I know it did not go down well in the slightest with us. It was essentially your classic early gacha example of the story not being properly thought out in general. But actually, I think a lot of that does come from, well, I guess most examples of those things come from the idea that you haven't got your full idea anyway. But now I think about it, even like the early gacha tubers would definitely have had like a story in mind for what they wanted to do, even if they didn't have all the multiple parts and stuff. Because a lot of like mini movies that I've said before feel like they were supposed to conclude in a certain point, and then people demanded more. See Straight in All Gay School as a recent example. But yeah, then you get other stuff, like for example, Eurovision pops. Whereas, because I realized that I've criticized Johnny in the past for doing more or less the same thing that I did, but the execution being different. So I've said this before, but Johnny definitely is the textbook example of somebody who has plans for where an episode of a show will go, or a particular scene that he wants to get to, but not necessarily caring how much he has to sacrifice to achieve that. And Eurovision Pop Spy is by no means the biggest offender of that. It's just that I certainly notice, first one, there's two patterns actually, one of which is that, he's relying a lot on sleepovers now for characters to be able to express flashbacks and share them with a group, which I have just realized is probably inspired by Totally TV and the source material, because the origins of the Super Pops episode was in fact a sleepover, and because because Camilla obviously hadn't been there for their actual origin point. I'm pretty sure they were actually telling her all about that, and they flash back to the moments that Majesty actually found them. So yeah, it's actually, now I think about it, yeah, of course, that was the inspiration behind that. And that episode particularly was very featured a few of the classical bunglers, which is not the case for most of the modern franchise. Actually, they've mostly branched out to their own, original enemies. Johnny has sort of gone back and forth on this as well. The disco pops, now I think about it, have particularly tackled the bunglers more than any other group has. Not to say that they've never come up before. See Ballet Pop's episode 5 for Disruptor's poisoning pigeons plan. But yeah, I guess that's sort of strange to think about now, because Johnny expressed his understandable discontent with how, I'm going to cross over again because I know they're going to start using power tools. Yeah, he expressed his understandable discontent with Totally TV, who have recently made a comeback. And the reason that he's not happy is because imagine the first thing that comes to mind, the first animation style that comes to mind when one envisions AI kid slop. You got that in your heads? That's essentially what the Pops look like now. I don't know what they sound like because I forgot to actually check out the video when it got sent to me. But it seems like one person is managing Totally TV now, and due to a lack of resources or honestly severed ties with a lot of the original performers in the series, it's definitely a shell of its former self. A shell of its former self run by a potential shield of its former self, if you will. But I guess maybe, that was like on Johnny's mind, because I can imagine if they're, trying to at least recreate the look of the original actors, they're probably trying to mimic the structure that worked so well for them before. And to be clear, Totally TV has always, tried to maximize like how easy and enticing it was to like make their things visible. They used to extend the runtime of their videos by like featuring like multiple different episodes in one, even though that tanks watch time. They would name all of their episodes and original songs after existing songs that were in the charts at the time of the episode's publication, so as to trick potential like new viewers. And now it seems like they have adapted to what younger Gen Alpha is slowly getting accustomed to. So yeah, and I don't know. That's what was I going to say? But going back to Johnny for a second in terms of episode structures, that's more or less, a him thing, as I mentioned before, about trying to make these things all happen, so that points in the episode can be achieved, and not because it makes sense structure-wise. See for example the cameos of like Alia, for example, who just happens to be the first person that they walk into in a city populated by 2.05 million people. And even though they probably would have like wanted to go and see, Jess and Amy anyway, at some point if they happen to have like an address of some kind. Honestly, yeah, like I said, Eurovision Pop's not the worst offender of that. it seems like Johnny's definitely, internalized that criticism. It's just that it seems to now exist in a few other smaller forms than it used to. That's not so bad, That's a relatively minor example in general. The much more obvious example, I think, if we switch over to the Minecraft side of things, belongs to Freak Show. So I have definitely I've sung the praises of Freak Show basically on nearly every single stream of theirs. There are some episodes that I really could not get past, the issues of, mostly in the first season, but the second season particularly feels much more structured and thought out, and like it has a direction. Not to say the first season didn't; it absolutely did. But I can definitely see them thinking about this in terms of like, what's going to be the first thing that we do in terms of like this semester or something? What's it going to end on? A school dance. Of course it does. Every high school drama ends on a school dance in the final episodes or so. Look at Fingertop Days. There were clearly no episodes after that one. Absolutely not. None whatsoever. But anyway. So I guess that's so in terms of like the full series structure, I really enjoy where it's going, and while I think overall the Occult Research Club has not made as much progress as I would have hoped they would, given how long they've been investigating into Rev and all the pieces they've actually put together. But then again, the Truth or Dare episode served as a way of like, well, they had a perfect chance there and they squandered it, potentially because they couldn't narratively make it that far in the investigation, which once again raises the question, why play Truth or Dare? Well, probably so we can actually get some confessions or humiliation out of the characters in a formatted way. Probably mostly to help out, like with easing Wendy into the group, even though they were all still at each other's throats and such. By episode 6, which is one we reviewed yesterday, Wendy seems still on edge with people, as evidenced by the first scene, but they are much more relaxed around her and she around them than before. But regarding the episode, those parts were a couple like smaller moments, if anyone hasn't seen Freak Show and it's just like watching this because they want to hear my mad ramblings about writing for whatever reason, Freak Show is formatted so that every episode starts off with Minecraft animation, and then goes into actual single player, filmed in-game Minecraft moments for the bulk of the episode, and then goes back into animation towards the end. Case in point, the beginning and end versus the middle, because it's sort of starting to feel like some of the middle portions are partially improvised. I would say that, but thinking back to Year 9 English class and the unit we did about improvised dialogue versus scripted dialogue, none of them say like any ums and ahs or things like that. So, no filler words get mentioned in the structure, which does suggest that everything is planned out and scripted, now that I think about it. But that only raises the question further as to why it feels like they are somewhat floundering sometimes in the middle of their episodes. They obviously have, I'm pretty sure that they, dub the lines in post for when they go into like the displayed like dialogue moments with the animation stills and the typical NPC format. Pretty sure those are dubbed in post. Don't know about the other lines, but it is also entirely possible that that's how they do it. I don't know. I have to look more into their behind the scenes process. As I've mentioned, there are a few technical elements that I am somewhat baffled by. But scripted or not, it doesn't negate the idea that the single player portions tend to be where most of my issues come up in the episodes. Characters either acting out of character, doing something that just seems to push the scene along, rather than be like an actual well thought out conscious decision, or even lines of dialogue that directly contradict each other when they're spoken. Like, for example, when Roman and Mary came back last episode and said that they've been setting up a trap for Hara, but then Mary complained that Rev had taken care, or seemingly taken care, of Cleo without her, even though she ran off and chose to not look for him in order to set up the trap with him, or see if he was doing something else rather than just, sitting and twiddling his thumbs after talking to Lovecraft. Most episodes have those things. But this episode particularly, the thing that stands out most of all as we wanted to get to this point and we hadn't properly thought out exactly how, was the whole gimmick of Valentine's Day. So yes, in universe, they've skipped ahead a few weeks. It makes sense, given they came back from Christmas break before season 2 started, that we are now in February. So that's not the issue. The issue is that after Rev got jumped by the organized students that organized themselves off screen, might I add. 3 out of the 4 of them were put on the board, and it turns out, yes, they are the 3 vainest girls in the school. So they say, oh, this is the prime opportunity here, this is Roman and Mary again, by the way. They say, oh, this is the prime opportunity to, get revenge on them because it's Valentine's Day, and in the school we have this big competition regarding, getting roses, and the one who has the most roses from the most students will be named the school sweetheart. Well, the 2 of them actually. It was meant to be like a couple, supposedly. So there are 2 students that get the most, and that's perfect. 2 students that get the most, and there were 3 rivals, and obviously they're all going to want to gun for the crown. And it seems like the idea is they've just organized themselves, they've got a hierarchy going, but their combined vanity would serve as their undoing. So you think that as the groups are going to try and get revenge on the 3 girls, that they would play into that aspect and make it so that they would essentially tear each other apart. But no. Instead, they go for a method that I have said is quite a smart one on Rev's part. He knows what kind of things each of them are vulnerable to, so he chooses revenge methods that are very personal to them, despite Roman's protestations that he's not going far enough. But he knows all 3 of them well enough, maybe not Cleo, but he knows 2 of them, maybe Cleo, well enough to know what is going to be terrible for them. Even Roman himself, when he traps Hara before, seems like that was that was like kind of like his plan. It's not like he actually tried to like, you know, make a huge like counterweight or something to fall, and it was like a sack of flour or something. I don't know. But they just do that individually. So there was no purpose to making it Valentine's Day, ultimately. Except for the final scene where Rev goes on stage and, you know, yells at the people that, you know, we all hate it here, I'm doing something about it, why do you hate me so much? I miraculously avoided collateral damage. Still the jury's still out about how that happened, but still, that was the idea. And once they realized that, oh yeah, that is exactly what he's been doing and why we admired him in the first season, before we got caught in the crossfire and then hated him for natural reasons. Let's all throw all of our roses at him and make him the sweetheart. And it feels like they want to get to that point in the episode, and also to the point where like Sarah steals the bouquet that Cleo had in order to actually become, you know, like the couple's sweetheart or something, and then, you know, incentivize Mary to potentially go after Sarah, as was implied in the final shot. All of that they wanted to get to, but they didn't take advantage of the competition while it was being held in the middle portion of the episode. That's what I mean when it seems like the method of the beginning and then the planned ending and then figure out the middle as it goes. It works best, I think, the longer the middle portion actually is. Because, you know, I guess even the length of a Freak Show episode, which tend to be like, you know, 40 minutes or so on average, it still seems like they haven't quite got that down. I think they probably, you know, need to make sure they've got their internal